Do you know that in Jesus' day and in Moses' day, it was a no-fault divorce? You think that's a new thing? It is not. That's where it started. And you know how I know that? Because of the culture at that time. And the Pharisees asked Jesus one day, they said, do you, like Moses, allow... are you waving at me? No, okay. I thought you were waving at me. I thought, okay. They asked Jesus, do you, like Moses, allow divorce? And Jesus never negated that divorce was allowed. But he gave a really interesting answer. He said Moses allowed divorce, and you would think he would come up with all the reasons, like infidelity, right? And you'd think he would have come up with all those reasons. And instead, he said, because of the hardness of the heart. And so we based on our ministry, and then he continues and he says, but it was not so in the beginning. In other words, that's not what it was meant to be. Marriage and relationships were not meant to break up, okay? And that's mothers and fathers, that's children with their parents, that's any relationship. It was not so in the beginning. We were meant for fellowship. And then if you take the love factor and they ask Jesus, you know, how will they know that we are Christians? What was the answer again? What it was in the beginning, right? By the love you have one to another. When you're not in a good relationship, there's not much love, right, that's being expressed. And so the book really is good for that. The forgiveness CD is good for that. But we based our ministry on, let's look at I call them the rocks. I don't have my rocks tonight. I usually don't ever minister without my rocks, but God put something else on my heart tonight. But the hardness of the heart, I identify them as rocks. And if we will reveal our rocks, and if we will say, look, this is the hardness of my heart, we all have hardness of heart. It might come in the form of anger. It might come in the form of resentment. It might come in the form of offense. You know, the devil's bait is offense. And it may come in the form of guilt or shame. That all hardens the heart and puts a wall between this way and this way. And so part of our lives are to look at the hardness of our heart, being responsible for it, and then working it out, resolving it, and making all things new. In our teaching, if you've ever been to some of our teaching, some of you I know have done the DVD series, haven't you, in the church here. You'll remember the R3, and that is to reveal. You cannot change or heal what you do not reveal. Okay? You can't change or heal if you don't admit you've got anger. How's that going to change if I'm not mad? Right? You can't rewrite your story without compassion. You can't rewrite the offenses that have been done to you and the offenses you've put out there without compassion and forgiveness. And you can't renew without not desiring better than it was before. Renew is in the future. Renew is every day is a new day. New mercies every day. Every day you renew. So that's just a little freebie there. I have, in order to renew, I have a necklace back there, and there's just a big if on it. You know, if. And people walk up to you and go, if what? And on the back of it is the code that says 2 Corinthians 5:17. If any man, any person is in Christ, what is he? A new creation. I can't get it out, but it's here. There it is. So the big if. And it's a great conversation. And I just want to tell you that the book is usually $20. The CDs are $10 tonight. I don't have very many. I will autograph them tonight. I usually don't do that either, just because I have an issue with signing books. But because there's not many, I will do it. You know why I have an issue with it? Not because I'm thinking I'm all that, but because I never know how to just sign my name and say, make it a great life or something. You know, most authors have this one line, I look at you and then I think I have to have a prophetic word, right? And it just, and God gives it to me. So when there's 100 people in the lineup, I'm going, but tonight it's a long night. So tonight there's very few books. So you'll each get a little tiny word, okay? And then I have my I get to, which now we've turned to real silver. Some of you got them before. And do you love it? It's yours. This one's yours. There's not very many in the back, so I'm going to give her mine. And hers says, this one, my personal one, okay, help me get it. My personal one says, I get to live. Right? So experience life. Right? That's your new motto. There you go. But tonight, God's given me a special message. It's actually an old message, but He renewed it in my own spirit. And I want to start with, first of all, telling you that it is, as much as it is a biblical message, it is not as biblical as I had planned. I had really wanted to teach tonight, and instead God put in my heart Revelation. In Revelation, I think it is, let me just look it up just so I get it right. In Revelation, it says that you overcome, right? You know that scripture? You overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So it's Revelation 12:11. And God put that in my heart, and He just told me that I don't know who's here tonight, but you need to hear that your past is not determining your future, but your past is your testimony when it is resolved and put under the blood. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of that real quick, and then I'm going to share my testimony. And the 2 examples I want to give you are 2 women, 2 very famous women. There's lots of famous women in the Bible, so I'm going to brag on them. But they weren't good women. And one of them is, as you know probably well, the woman caught in adultery. That was her past. She had a horrible past, and she was caught, it says, in the act. They never brought the man with them, but I'm not sure where, because if it's in the act, he had to be there, but he didn't get brought in front of everybody. But the woman that day that was brought to Jesus had a past of shame, had a past of guilt, had a past of, you know, this is it. That's all I'm good for. And when they brought her to Jesus, as you know the story, what did Jesus say? Whatever He wrote in the sand, we don't know, but it got rid of the crowd. Every single one of them that were there to condemn her. And He looked at her and He said, woman, stand up. Because she was down ready for her stoning. Ready to die for her sins. But instead, Jesus said, get up, woman. And He looked at her and He goes, where are your accusers? I'd like to ask you the same thing. Where are your accusers? And does it start with you? How many times a day do you accuse yourself? How many times a day do you throw stones at yourself and others? Maybe you're throwing stones at others too. Because you see, one thing about that crowd that was there that day, including the Pharisees, it says from the oldest. In other words, those most stuck in tradition in their religion, from the oldest to the youngest, they dropped their rock. So you got to give them credit for something. They always get a bad rap, those Pharisees. But that day, you got to give them credit. They could not present themselves flawless. So when we're throwing stones at people, it means we think we're flawless. Think about that. The next time you gossip, the next time you want to roast the pastor or someone else because they've hurt you, have you not hurt anyone ever? And it's about filtering the reveal part. Filter it, right? But then when you feel condemned, when the words of gossip and the labels are going out against you, do you look at your accusers or do you look at Jesus? But I want you to see something. Jesus didn't just say, neither do I condemn you. Your accusers are gone. They've disappeared. There's no one here. You're not getting stoned today. You're going to die, but not today. But then he said, he gave her a future. He said, you don't have to be that person anymore. You don't have to look back. That's your testimony. Forever and ever and ever till the end of, until eternity. We're going to see her up there. Her story will never end. It's being told globally everywhere. It's been told for over 2,000 years. Imagine your story as a prostitute or as an adulteress being told for the rest of time. Man, if that was my story, I'd be going, not again, please, please don't tell them again. But it became her testimony. A story that they wanted to stone her for became her testimony. And then there's the other woman, the woman at the well. She comes to the well late because she's so labeled that she has to come in the noon sun, the hottest part of the day. Because when the women came, they would come early in the morning. She couldn't show up with them. Oh my gosh, there's so-and-so, like, gosh, did you know what husband she's on now? Does anybody know what number she's on now? She couldn't come. She couldn't show her face. The other interesting part about the woman at the well is that men weren't allowed at the well. Men never went to the well. That was a woman's place. That was sort of the small group. Their small group met at the well, right? They didn't have a men's small group at the well. So this woman is walking up to the well and I'm just interpreting here, and she goes, crap. Like, I come when it's so hot because nobody's supposed to be there. And then she looks and she goes, there's a man there. And Jesus sees her approaching. She goes, well, I got to get this water. What am I going to do? And Jesus is sitting there. And he starts talking to her. Another bad thing. Not only is a man not supposed to be at the well, he's not supposed to be talking to women at the well either. He starts talking to her. Now follow me here, all the questions that are being asked, and she's wondering what he's doing there. And she lets him know she's a Samaritan. So not only aren't you supposed to be here, you're not supposed to talk to me, but do you know I'm a Samaritan? And Jesus kind of looks at her and says, do you know who I am? Right? And she's looking at him and going, man. And she starts, he starts talking about water and wanting to give her something and all the rest of it, and she's not getting it. And then somehow it gets around to, of course, revealing. And Jesus says to her, you've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with is not your husband. That makes 6, right? That's 6 men. But that day, she met man number 7. Man number 7. And he said to her, if you'll drink the water that I give you, you don't have to go back to the other 6. You don't have to wear that reputation anymore. I'm man number 7. You will never thirst again. How many of you are looking for the man number 7? Like really meet him. Because then he'll tell you you can move past all that That's your testimony. Do you know she became the first woman preacher? I love that woman. She went back to town, and it didn't matter if they were men or women or children. She made sure they heard her voice, and she was so changed, they listened. They listened to a woman who'd had 5 husbands and was living with a man. Imagine that, who couldn't go to the well. She couldn't go to the well, but yet she preached to the whole city, it says. And they listened. Don't tell me there's not good women preachers out there, even with a past. And so now the decision is your past is your past. You can't change that. Do you want it to be your past as one to condemn you? Or do you want it to be a testimony for one that you can speak of? You know, I don't know how many of you grew up in old-time Pentecost. Anybody? I did. Maybe you're not old enough for that. I grew up in old-time Pentecost, and I don't know if any of you remember these things, but I remember Sunday night was testimony night. Right? And people would just get up, and the Lord did this, and there was one old lady that had the same testimony every Sunday night, and non-fail, she would get up. And I'd think, well, you know, like there's nobody new in the church, so why is she sharing the same testimony? You know, you were supposed to share testimony. Like, apparently God was supposed to be doing something every week, right? So, like if you shared your testimony last week and nothing happened this week, you shouldn't get up. Right? Let somebody else share. Something might have happened. But this old lady, she would get up every time. And she'd be sitting there, and she'd get up, you know, and she was really old. And she'd turn around, and she'd face everybody, and she said, "My Jesus, 50 years ago, saved me from the streets. My Jesus, 50 years ago, saved me from divorce. My Jesus, 50 years ago, saved me from the pit of alcohol." And, I mean, she had and she went on and on. I'm not going to go on and on. And she goes, because 50 years ago, he became my Jesus. And he saved me from that whole life. I never had to experience any of it. And I just thought, how amazing. Because everybody would get up, you know, and my Jesus, you know, when I got saved, I was an alcoholic. When I got saved, and she just decided God saved her from it all. Because she accepted Jesus 50 years before when she was a child. So I thought that was always a powerful testimony. There's always people that think that their testimony, if they weren't the woman at the well or they weren't the... Guess what? That's the greatest testimony of all, is to accept Jesus as a child and never look back. And never look back and know it. That to me, you know, is the greatest testimony at all. I want to show you a picture tonight, because now I want to share my testimony. I want to show you a picture of my family. I don't know how many of you know my story, but my husband passed away 5 years ago, Christmas Day. So it'll be 5 years on Christmas Day. And that was taken 2 months before he passed away. And I show this picture, not because I think I have the most beautiful family in the world, because I do think that. That's my truth. And my eldest daughter is Jenny, and she's on the left. And then there's my son, Josh. And then there's my youngest, who's now 14, Mia. She's been here a couple of times. And then there's my daughter-in-law, Mary. And then our first grandchild, now I have 3. But I show you that picture because that picture, this is what my message is really about tonight. If you leave your past behind and you make a decision of what's your future. Like Jesus said, I no longer condemn you, go and do it no more. So today can be that day for you, that you stop condemning yourself. And you've got to have a picture in front of you. That picture in front of me there, I saw that before I ever met the man I married. I had that picture. Because I believed that the man I was going to marry would be till death do us part. And that divorce would never be part of our family legacy. I didn't say murder wouldn't be, but divorce, no. okay? Many times I could have killed him, but not divorce. But that picture for me existed as a teenager when I started thinking about a husband, when I started thinking about what my family would look like. I started seeing Christmas because you see, some of the friends that I hung out with had 2 homes, and they hated the stepmother or the stepfather, and I never wanted that. And I wanted a home that was fun for my kids, and I started seeing all kinds of fun when they were teenagers. We had a party. We had so many kids over at our house, we could no longer have a key to the door. My husband had to put in a code because the keys would get lost, right? And so people would forget to put it back in the hiding spot, and so he just got a code. And if you knocked on the door, we knew you were a stranger. And it was like, who could be at the door? Anybody expecting anybody? Because everybody else knew how to get in. Our house was always full. But I dreamed that before I had those children. We never knew how many people were sleeping in our house. It was sort of whoever showed up for breakfast, I guess, spent the weekend. But I dreamed that because you see, at my house, growing up, I wasn't allowed any friends over, ever. And I used to go to friends' houses that we'd all hang out in. I thought, this is the kind of house I want. I started dreaming those things. So that was the picture that was before me. Why do I tell you that? Because based on the picture that you have before you is the reality that you create. Okay? So because I had that picture, 20 years before that picture was taken, my husband had an affair. Didn't have that in my thoughts. Didn't think of that. I thought a divorce wasn't going to happen, but I wasn't prepared for that. But because of the picture that was instilled in me, for better or worse, I knew that I could get out or we could heal. And yes, the decision was also his. But we decided to take that reveal, rewrite, and renew. And this is a message of hope to you for anybody who's hurting, anybody who's ever felt betrayed. And it doesn't matter what the situation is. For me, it was infidelity. But 20 years before that picture was taken, I would have never imagined that that story of infidelity and us healing was going to save thousands of marriage in infidelity. Never imagined that. That the greatest pain of my life would become my greatest gift. The other thing I never imagined, and I don't think I've told Pastor Shannon this yet, the other thing I never imagined is that a year ago, Focus on the Family approached me and asked me if I had a book idea. And I said, I do. It's on spiritual damage, and nobody wants it. And they said, really, we don't want it either. And I said, well, would you like The Other Woman Saved My Marriage? And they said, what? And I said, The Other Woman Saved My Marriage. And they said, send us a 1-page on it. Sent them 1 page. They said, please don't show it to anybody else. It says it's one of the most powerful books we've ever read. Or the idea was the most powerful. Then they got the book. They said, we want to publish it. Would I have imagined that 20 years before that picture was taken? That a non-author here, my husband and I self-published a book. That Focus on the Family would ask me to write a book, and now they're talking a movie? Right? That's what are you going to do with your story? Forget all that. There's people in that picture that wouldn't be there had we not decided to heal. I'll tell you who wouldn't be there, and that's my daughter, the youngest one, the 14-year-old now. Sometimes I wish she wasn't here right now, but if you've had a 14-year-old, you get it. Right? 14 she's now. We got her when she was 3 months old. We moved after the infidelity, and we ended up in the streets of Vancouver, healing the broken there, the drug addicts and the prostitutes. We were working with the downtown east side of Vancouver. That's where we got her and adopted her. She wouldn't be there. She'd still be somewhere on that east side. She's been my lifeline because she makes me get up every morning. I had to get up. I couldn't wallow where I wanted to wallow in pain and feel sorry for myself because I lost my husband of 32 years. God knew what he was doing. The other person that wouldn't be there is my daughter-in-law. Because of the move, they met at school. She's the closest thing on this earth to a Proverbs 31 woman that I've ever met. Ever. The way she runs that home, the way she runs my son, and the way she raises those children. Sometimes I wonder if she's a real person. The biggest gift she has is that she loves her mother-in-law, right? But she wouldn't be there. And now I want to start the slideshow because the other thing, and thank God for your staff back here because this was I just got this picture. I always show this picture to show you that when you make a decision to get away from the old and walk into your new, your destiny, then guess what the reward is? Watch my reward. Hallelujah, baby. One decision to leave the condemnation, to leave the shame of that affair. The reason I wanted to write a book on religious damage was because we basically were asked to leave the church because we were staying together. They wanted to save the ministry, and they would have helped me save the ministry if I divorced him. And I said no. My family, because that family picture was in my heart before I was 18. My church ministry wasn't first. It says first take care of your family. So if you've messed up today, think about what future God has for you and what he's saying to you. Because, same with the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well. See, the thing is, right now, there could be all kinds of reasons why the woman ended up at the well. It could have been, obviously, it was the hurt of her past. Obviously, there were rocks in her heart. There was a hardness of heart. That woman that was committing adultery, what was her reasons? We don't know, but we all know that the hardness of our heart doesn't lead us into the things that God created us for. It was not so in the beginning. God is love. Therefore, And if we were created in his image, that means we are wired in love. We were wired for love. And when we step out of that wiring, it's like trying to put a light bulb into a socket that doesn't fit. Right? If you put a light bulb in the right socket, it gives you light. You try to put something else in that socket, or even the wrong size light bulb, you're not going to get light because it was wired for something else. We were wired for love in God's image because he is love. So when we step outside of that, we end up in adultery. We end up on drugs. Why? Because we're trying to fill the void. But when Jesus comes in, when he sits at the well, and you know, wait a minute, you shouldn't be receiving me. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be offering me anything. Do you know who I am? She said. I'm a Samaritan. Jesus wasn't, I thought, man, she's revealing already she's an unliked person. And then you make it worse. He says, no, you're not only a Samaritan. You have 5 husbands and the one you're living with isn't even yours. Okay, well, what else would you like to tell me about me? See, when Jesus helps you reveal and helps you look in the mirror, it's to redeem you, not to condemn you. Right? Right? Let me tell you something about why our infidelity healed, and what I teach around the nation now and in our programs is I tell everybody to take responsibility for their part. You know, I started by telling you that they didn't bring the man to take his responsibility. They only brought the woman to be stoned. Well, that day when I found out from a phone call that my husband had been unfaithful, first of all, it came of no belief to me. I could not believe it. He was not that man. He was not that man. And I used to tell people I could be unfaithful 100 times to his one. I would have believed I could have fallen, not him. He was that perfect. At least in my eyes. Came from a beautiful Christian home, no dysfunction to speak of. The only reason we didn't have sex before we got married was certainly not because of me. I'll confess that it was him, all him. Purity. He led worship all of his life from the time he was this high on his ukulele. How could this happen to him? So I wouldn't believe it until I heard his voice, those 3 words, yes, it's true. One of the most devastating days of my life. I went to bed that night. He was not home. He was visiting his father because his mom had just died. I went to bed that night. I don't think I slept. My eyes were swollen. I'd done a lot of ugly crying that night. Got up to go to the bathroom. And I don't know about you, but I have a mirror in my bathroom. And all of a sudden I look in the mirror and I'm going, oh my God, I look like a truck ran over me. I mean, my eyes were so swollen and black. And I went, God, why? This was the height of our ministry. We were seeing souls saved everywhere. It was just an incredible time. All our dreams from the time before we got married, we were finally seeing it all come to pass. And I look in the mirror and I'm seeing this and I'm going, God, why? Like how? What happened? How did he do this? And I'm crying and expecting sympathy from Jesus. And instead I hear his voice and he says, stop it. Stop crying. And I look and I thought, that can't be Jesus. That can't be Jesus. Certainly he feels sorry for me right now. Instead, I hear these words. What part did you play in it? And I went, me? Now I know it's not God. There's no way Jesus would say that to me. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't do anything wrong. I've been a good wife. And then I got mad. I said, fine. If that's you, then you just show me what I did wrong. And the revelation, now you got to wait for the book to come out because I'm not going to tell you the rest. Because I share it all in there. But that was the saving grace of God. I felt like that woman that he revealed to her part and why she had to come to the well at that time. But that wasn't the end of her story. See, that reward that we got and that I have today of that family was, first of all, a decision I made a long time ago. But wherever you're at today, you get to decide your future. Because you know the reality is some things that have happened to you might be because of the decisions other people made in your life. It might have happened as a child. Somebody got you addicted to drugs. Maybe you were sexually abused. Maybe, who knows? You ended up with the wrong friends. Maybe your mom and dad split up. We all have a story. We all have a story. That's the past, and somebody might have been the reason you're sitting here today for good or bad. But what you need to hear me say today is the decisions that they made might have affected you. Do you know that Joseph made decisions? His brothers made a decision for him and sold him to slavery. He ended up in prison. None of that was his fault. Well, he bragged a little, about how they were going to bow down and serve him one day. But because of their decisions based on jealousy and that he was favored by his father, they threw him down the well. He was taken into slavery. He was imprisoned, then he was let out. But I want you to see something about the story of Joseph really quickly. Notice that what they did, he couldn't stop. He couldn't change. Now, he was bought for slavery. He was thrown into prison. All that happened to him. He could have believed God to change that, but it didn't change the circumstances. So he's in the pit. Nothing changes. There's no great deliverer that comes and pulls him out. No, it's slave traders that come and buy him and take him. Then he's falsely accused. And Potiphar's wife, but watch the decisions Joseph does have power over. In slavery, he's the best. He didn't change because his brothers did something to him. If something changes you because of something that someone has done to you, look in the mirror. Because you can hit this cheek, and what am I supposed to do? Turn the other one, right? You can control, as Joseph did. He could have gone into, woe is me, God, you told me, you gave me a dream. He kept his dream. I kept my picture. I wasn't calling for the affair. I didn't want the affair. I didn't want that pain. I didn't want my family, but I had a dream that God placed in my heart that there was going to be no divorce. I hung on to my dream in my times of trouble. What are you hanging on to? What picture are you hanging on to? It was not in my dream that my husband would die at 52. I got mad at God again. I said, we're all good now, height of our ministry again. And now you let the devil take him? He goes, did I? I thought you told me. See, when Ron was first diagnosed, he was only given 4 months to live, and he lived 4 years cancer-free. And he had a list. 12 hours before he died, the last thing on his, and I'm talking a hard list. We're talking about impossible things. He did more in 4 years than we did in 25 years of ministry. More in 4 years. But he knew that one thing he did not want to change in God's economy, and one thing he knew he couldn't change, was his birth. The other thing he did not want to change was the day that he was destined to die before he was born. Our days are numbered. He wanted that number not to change. He didn't want to die. But he said, God, don't change that. He said, but I'm going to take control of the dash. You know, on a tombstone, there's the date of your birth and there's the date of your death. In between, there's the dash. That's what Joseph did. He took control of the dash. They threw him in, they got out, all because he kept getting favor. Then he goes back in and there's the butler, and the butler forgets about him. I mean, really study this. But he doesn't change. He never says to God, I thought I was going to be like, King Kong here. He doesn't ever tell God that his dream isn't going to come to pass. Joseph was thrown in the pit when he was about 17, they say. I don't know quite. You can go study it. Don't take my word for it. Ask Josh. When he come, Pastor Josh, ask Pastor Josh. And he was about 30 by the time he became that ruler. That's a lot of years to keep going through stuff, through crap after, and keep getting accused and forgotten. What else? Being, in like all of it. But he was exemplary in every situation. In every situation. He did not change. Are you changing because of the things that people do? Think about that. Or things that people say about you. Do you quit going to church because, Mrs. So-and-so said such and such? Examine yourself. And I want to end with this. It's your decision to rewrite what the enemy meant for evil. And just put up those last scriptures. I want to give you these scriptures because our whole legacy, including what my daughter's doing now with the downtown people, and so is my son. Ooh, that's pretty small. It's in Genesis. Oh, it's bigger there. Okay. In Genesis, it is talking about Joseph. Look at what he says to his brothers when he's reunited with them and they're bowing down. He says, and now don't be distressed. In other words, don't freak out. Don't get upset. Don't be afraid. Don't be distressed. And do not be angry with yourselves. Look at what he's saying to them. Stop being... That tells me that they must have been angry with themselves and felt the guilt and saw the father's pain. The father's pain never left him. They had to see their father like that every day because it was, and look at what he says, do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives. Imagine that the things of your past, that woman, those two women that met with Jesus, what was it meant for? To save lives. That God sent me ahead of you. In other words, I'm in this position today. You're there. Don't be angry. This is what it took to save lives. What's your testimony willing to do? What is God willing to do with your testimony if you'll take this attitude? And in Genesis 50:20, you intended to harm me. That was their intention. What's God's intention over your life? No matter who's trying to harm you, what's God's intention? Right? What's God's intention? And he's very clear. You intended to harm me. That's true. You wanted to get rid of me, but God intended it all for good. He's a good God. And no matter what happens to you, He's going to intend it for good. And in the New Testament, it says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me, this is the Apostle Paul, has actually served for the advance of the gospel. My story of infidelity that my husband asked me to never stop sharing has been used by God for the proclamation of the gospel. Not only marriages have been saved, people have been saved into the family of God. What is your testimony doing? You were born as problem solvers. So take your problems that you've had, ask Jesus what He can do with them and what they're intended for, and then go. Take the gift, take the testimony of your gift, and overcome the enemy.